Southern folk culture and black resistance. Black Southern folk culture produced two gendered cultural constructs, the bad Negro and Brer Rabbit, which are useful in analyzing black resistance to white violence and domination. These cultural prototypes have origins in traditional African society, but were constructed in slavery and are active in contemporary black experience in U.S. culture. Reinforced by the individual and informal actions of legendary black resistors, these cultural constructs contributed to maintaining black insurgent consciousness in an era when accommodation was a dominant ideology in Southern black communities. The bad Negro construct is very important in black folklore and Southern culture. In white Southern culture, bad Negroes were those who openly defied segregationist customs and were not differential to whites, as was expected in white supremacist social etiquette. To white segregationist society, the behavior of bad Negroes was considered uppity, sullen, and dangerous to the security of the social order. Blacks had an ambivalent response to bad Negroes, who were seen by some as troublemakers and revered and respected by others. Some lived vicariously through the actions of bad Negroes, who sometimes behaved and lived as some blacks dreamed and wished they could. In black folk culture, the bad Negro is revered and depicted in an honorific manner. In the context of segregationist ethics, blacks who possessed the resources or physical space to avoid being constantly subjected to the humiliation imposed on the majority of black Southerners were also considered bad Negroes. This is particularly true of blacks who, due to their resources, could, unlike their sharecropping brothers and sisters, live an existence semi-autonomous from segregationist society. Particularly in rural areas, bad Negroes were often those who owned enough land to survive and support their households without being involved in agrarian peonage. In 1964, there were 1 million acres of land owned by Mississippians of African descent. In black majority counties or in contiguous African descendant communities, black landowners and their offspring proved to be more defiant to white supremacist codes of behavior. Ed Cole, a 1960s civil rights activist who later became a state Democratic Party official, grew up in a land-owning family in black majority Jefferson County in southwest Mississippi. Cole remembers that his father would not allow his children to work for white planters. Often privileged blacks would restrict their offspring from working for whites so as to protect their children from racial indignities and disrespect. During the dominance of apartheid, white domination was so attached to the concept of black servile labor that black men could not wear a white shirt downtown during weekdays in Lafayette, the Jefferson County seat. Wearing a white dress shirt was equated with not engaging in servile labor and was reserved for privileged whites during the week, and blacks only on the weekend, which was the only time when blacks had periods of leisure during daylight hours. Providing an example of his father's defiance, Cole cited a time when his father confronted whites who were hunting on his property without his permission. Cole spoke with pride about his father's stance to protect his family and the courage he displayed in a white supremacist environment. Often guns were necessary to preserve the dignity and security of land-owning bad Negroes, facing reprisals from whites. Oral testimonies of several black Mississippians reveal a collective memory of the armed resistance of land-owning bad Negroes, challenging racist whites. SNCC activist MacArthur Cotton remembered black landowners in his home county of Attala cooperating to defend their community from night riders. After the Emancipation and the Civil War, blacks began to occupy land, 1/3 of the county, and form contiguous communities in the hills of Attala. Cotton remembers black landowners setting traps to protect their communities from night riders. In Madison, a black majority county in the central region of the state, C.O. Chin was a revered bad Negro of the black community and the freedom struggle. Chin acknowledged that his reputation as a bad or crazy Negro began with an incident that occurred when he was a teenager. Chin was born into a family that owned 154 acres of land. Since his family was privileged, as a young man, Chin did not have to engage in labor during the week and was often observed wearing dress shirts. In keeping with Cole's description of apartheid in Jefferson County, the thought of a young black male not engaged in servile labor was unsettling for some whites, many of whom believed Chin was a bad example for other young blacks. C.O. Chin's mother told him that a local white planter approached her and insisted that the young man either find work during the week, preferably with a white employer, or leave the county. Upon hearing of the white planter's demand, Chin asked his mother, "Mama, do you owe this man any money?" After learning that neither she nor the family owed the white planter anything, he asked his elder permission to resolve the problem. According to Chin, he went to the white farmer's plantation and surprised him with a .38 handgun and politely warned him to stay out of the Chin family's business. Chin stated that this incident won him the reputation of being a crazy nigger, thereby arousing the fear of local whites and the admiration of local blacks. As an adult, Mr. Chin would become one of the most revered activists in the Mississippi Civil Rights Movement. Miss Annie Colton Reeves grew up during the Depression years in the Algiers community of Pike County in the southern part of the state. Her parents owned several firearms, including a Winchester rifle, a .22 rifle, a shotgun, and 2 handguns. Her father would say, "It's better to have ammunition than have food." She and her siblings, 2 brothers and 4 sisters, were all taught by her father to use firearms. It was important to the Colton patriarch that his daughters become proficient in the use of weapons to protect themselves from white rapists. According to Ann Colton, her family was known in their community for being a defiant family that stood up to white folks. Defiant blacks in the vein of Joe Pullen were acknowledged as bad Negroes solely due to their exceptional acts of armed resistance. One of the most extraordinary examples of this type of bad Negro is the case of Eddie Knoll in Holmes County. Holmes was a black majority county in the southeastern part of the Delta in the central region of the state. In January of 1954, Eddie Knoll, a 28-year-old black man, shot and killed the son of a white store owner as a result of a dispute in Ebenezer, near the county seat of Lexington. Knoll was ordered by the owner to leave his store. After Knoll left the store, he noticed the owner and his son approaching the porch. Believing they were coming to shoot him, Knoll shot and killed the store owner's son, 30-year-old Willie Dickard. Knoll was a U.S. Army veteran and a sharpshooter. Local lore suggests that the Army veteran had a reputation for shooting matches and cigarettes out of his wife's mouth without harming her. Newspaper accounts and local oral history seem to differ on what occurred after he killed the store owner. Newspapers, generally based on sheriff's reports, asserted that when whites attempted to apprehend Knoll, the black sharpshooter killed 2 more whites, including a deputy sheriff, John Malone, and wounded 2 others in separate shootouts. The official newspaper account said that after 3 weeks surviving in the woods, Knoll turned himself in after being pursued by a posse that included the county sheriff, the state highway patrol, and over 100 volunteers. While Knoll was a fugitive, terror gripped the county's whites. White Holmes County journalist Hazel Brandon Smith remembered, "It was bedlam. Nurses and other female employees, many of whom lived in the area between the hospital and the Manhunt area, were afraid to go home, even in daylight. Their families were worried and frightened. A floor of the hospital was made comfortable for the women who did not want to leave." Black oral accounts claim that Knoll outdueled and scattered a posse of whites organized to kill him. In this version of the incident, the white posse worked in coordination with 500 members of the National Guard, supported by the Highway Patrol and the FBI with surveillance airplanes, all participating in a manhunt attempting to capture and murder Knoll in his refuge in the woods. Using search and destroy tactics, the white posse harassed Holmes County blacks, believing they were providing assistance to Knoll. Fearing his survival was becoming an embarrassment, state officials offered a deal to Knoll if he would turn himself in to authorities. After surrendering, Knoll would receive protection and be taken from Holmes County to Jackson to ensure a fair trial. Knoll accepted the offer. Both accounts agreed that Knoll was declared unfit to serve trial due to mental illness and sentenced to state mental hospital in Jackson. Reflecting the pride of black folks in bad Negroes, Holmes County activist T.C. Johnson reflected on the impact of Knoll on Holmes County blacks. It did give some of the black people the idea that they didn't have to take the beating and running and the abusement like they had been. I've heard a lot of them say it was good that somebody had the courage and the nerve to stand tall like a man than be treated like an animal. Johnson's statement implied that bad Negroes serve as inspirations for the developing civil rights movement. The actions of bad Negroes served as examples of courage necessary for activism in the struggle. While black resistance was often recognized and honored in the form of defiant black Negroes, insurgent actions and consciousness were often not visible in public but covert. Bad Negroes like Joe Pullen and Eddie Knoll were exceptional. In Southern black folklore, whether they be animal characters like Brer Rabbit or personages like High John the Conqueror. Black folk tricksters use deception and manipulation to overwhelm powerful foes. Like such tricksters of black folklore, most black folks feigned deference while maintaining an oppositional consciousness, quietly rejecting the assumptions of white supremacy. It was more common for blacks to show disdain for segregation and white people in general in the privacy of their own communities, hidden from the eyes of white society. Based upon his experiences growing up in apartheid Mississippi, the prolific black novelist Richard Wright describes this phenomenon. The white South said it knew niggers. Well, the white South had never known me, never known what I thought, what I felt. The white South said that I had a place in life. Well, my deepest instincts had always made me reject the place to which the white South had assigned me. It had never occurred to me that I was in any way an inferior being. And no word that I ever heard fall from the lips of Southern white men ever made me doubt the worth of my humanity. The majority of Southern blacks generally maintained two selves, one persona for white society and another within their own world. Historian Neil McMillan described the dual consciousness and behavior of the apartheid-era Mississippi blacks as an accommodative demeanor that often masked a resentful spirit. Some actualized their oppositional consciousness in the form of clandestine oppositional action. In the South, where blacks lived among white supremacist terror, black freedom activities were often concealed from white people. Mary Rowlandson argues that the UNIA military, the African Legion, possessed a more clandestine character in the rural South than did its urban and northern counterparts. The thought of blacks openly organizing defensive violence could not be tolerated in a system of white domination. Along with the church, much of the organizational life of the African descendant community took place through secretive fraternal organizations. Fraternal orders provided resources such as leadership development, cooperative financing, meeting places, and access to membership for black freedom and other social justice organizing in the South, including the NAACP, the UNIA, and sharecropper unions. Due to their sense of solidarity and clandestine practices, lodges also provided local, regional, and national networks and relationships, which could be useful in escaping lynch mobs and law enforcement, as well as in organizing self-defense. Like the folkloric trickster, the black freedom struggle utilized sleight of hand to evade the power of their adversary, white terrorism. To fight segregation, rather than engage in direct confrontation or acquiescence, some black Southerners chose to hit a straight lick with a crooked stick, a New World African proverb meaning to utilize deception to meet your objectives. Unable to rely upon law enforcement and the courts, black Southerners were forced to develop clandestine networks for protection and survival. Black oral tradition and journalistic accounts speak to an underground railroad or Negro Railroad, which helped blacks evade Southern lynch mobs and secure safe passage out of Jim Crow territory. In 1958, black journalist Arrington High arrived in Chicago claiming he had escaped from the Mississippi State Mental Hospital with the assistance of the Negro Underground. According to High, he had been confined to the state mental hospital for his public advocacy of school integration and his exposure in his newspaper, The Eagle Eye, of segregationist white male sexual tryst with black women. High escaped the state institution and was transported out of Mississippi concealed in a casket. Utilizing secrecy and deception was necessary to ensure the success of the underground network. Those black Mississippians who decided to stay and live in Mississippi had to endure the terror of apartheid. From Reconstruction until after World War II, the global, national, regional, and local political landscape did not provide the opportunity to overcome white supremacy and segregation. While the end of Reconstruction represented a significant defeat of the black freedom struggle, there was still hope. Blacks' preparation through community and institution building, as well as their maintenance of a culture of resistance, would serve as the foundations of a movement in the next period.